All right. Thank you all very much for coming back. Could I invite the panel to please come on up and help yourselves to seats. No particular order. Yeah, just make yourselves. It is my intention to turn the questioning over to you just as soon as we can. So the plan is that each of our panelists will just do a quick introduction of who they are, what organization they're from, what their interest is in the goals, and really keen to explore how through their organizations they are working on this agenda. And hopefully, through your questions, we'll be able to really get stuck in. For simplicity's sake, I'm thinking we'll just start with Paul, and we'll work our way over. And rather than me saying your names and you saying your name again, I'm just going to leave it to you, and off you go, Paul.
Brilliant. Okay, is this working? Is this on? Can you hear me all?
Yeah.
Brilliant. So my name is Paul Bradley, and I work for the Scottish Council for Voluntary Organisations. And I think I was a little bit hesitant at first to come and sit on the panel today because of that very reason. My background's in government, it's in third sector, and it's nowhere near businesses. But today isn't just about making the global goals local business. They're everyone's business, and I think that's come through the talks that we've been having so far today. And I think it's really important that we begin to look at how we work in partnership, and a lot of the stuff that Sandy mentioned in his presentation is some of the stuff that I want to really touch on today, and it's why I wanted to join the panel. As I said, I work for the Scottish Council for Voluntary Organisations, which is a membership organisation with over 1,900 members, and we're here to champion Scotland's charities, voluntary organisations and social enterprises. And when I joined SCVO, I think, February 2017, one of my tasks was to raise the profile of SDGs amongst third sector organisations and individuals. So a very simple task that I was handed there. And it really did hit me straight away that there was a real lack of discussion around the SDGs in Scotland's third sector, even though all of the work that we do is very clearly aligned to the goals. So since the start of the project that I lead on, we set up Scotland's Sustainable Development Goals Network. And since then, we've been able to secure over 150 members. We have campaigned at the Scottish Parliament to ensure that I think over 100 MSPs backed at least one goal that they saw relevant to their own work. Obviously, that's not ideal. There's lots of interconnections, but it was a way to get SDGs on their agenda. We have coordinated an open letter to the First Minister, to parliamentary committees and to local authorities, which received the backing of over 100 organisations in less than a week. We've set up Scotland's national platform for the SDGs, globalgoals.scot, and just recently we've coordinated a joint briefing between our members of the network to Department for International Development in the UK Government and to the Scottish Government on what we see the role of Scotland playing in the upcoming UK Voluntary National Review on the SDG progress in the UK. And I think our actions have really led to, bringing this to the attention of the First Minister through correspondence and through meetings, also through getting a commitment from all conveners at the Scottish Parliament committees to use SDGs in their scrutinisation of policies and of bills. And I think one thing that's been very clear is that we've built up a strong working relationship with the Scottish Government. We were able to secure a meeting dedicated towards the SDG network and the Scottish Government around the refresh of Scotland's National Performance Framework and the alignment of the SDGs in that. And many of the things that we suggested in that workshop come through into the final framework. I think that this partnership working has been really good to date, but that partnership working can't stop here. And I think there's a real opportunity for us as civil society to work more closely with business to really have a win-win partnership on the SDGs. And the best thing about the SDGs is it's not just one sector that can make the difference, and as I think Sandy mentioned that earlier on. And I think it's an opportunity for us to really take a fresh look at the value we place in partnerships across the third sector and businesses, and to think about what our common goal is on the SDGs and how we can work together on that. And obviously it's not always easy working with businesses and charities together. There are differences of opinions, there are areas of opposition in some areas, but I think that the SDGs is an area where we can find some unity and some common grounds to really move towards a shared goal of seeing the potential of the SDGs realised in Scotland. And over the past year and a half, I've seen how a coalition can really get the ears and the attention of parliamentarians, of government, and of individuals as well who have just joined the network. And I think that I would ask the question of what would the response be of government and of our parliament if they saw a more united business and third sector collaboration in championing the SDGs. And I think that that is our common goal and something that we need to work towards. I think also this provides us an opportunity to challenge assumptions of the role of business and charities in society, and also think about how we can rebuild trust and build trust across our organisations and the sectors, and working together. And finally, I think that a clear sign of unity would send a clear signal that the global goals are everyone's business. And I think that it would show that these goals are unstoppable. Let's frame it as that. Let's frame it as these are unstoppable goals. The world is changing, and that our fellow organisations, our governments, our parliaments need to act quick. They need to increase their efforts to really catch up.
Thanks, Paul. I'm curious, actually, to your point. Maybe a show of hands if you're not from a business, just so we can get a sense of how. Okay, well, that's not bad representation. And to join your network, what do we do? I'm in, and I can say that I find it very informative and very useful, so I highly recommend it. And
yeah, all you need to go to is globalgoals.scot, click on Join Forum, and there you're there. And it's that simple. And we've kept it that simple because any individual or any organisation can join it. And it keeps it in line with the Leave No One Behind. And we need to stop having conversations behind closed doors. We need to make sure that this agenda is out in the open. So anything we talk about, anything we discuss, we've got a meeting after this session, all of that is shared online. And I think that's what we're trying to do as we go forward. And we are looking to create a bit more structure in the network, but to date it has worked very well. Yeah,
a great resource for just keeping yourself informed about the SDG conversation that's happening here in Scotland. Yeah, Michael.
Hi everybody, my name is Michael Alexander, I'm from Diageo. For those that don't know Diageo, we're a large global drinks company, brands like Smirnoff, Guinness, Baileys, Gordon's, Captain Morgan and others. So I'm giving you a big global company perspective, no apologies for that, but hopefully I can relate it to also smaller companies and just Scottish-based companies around, so that it becomes relevant for everybody. So we have manufacturing in about 30 countries around the world, about 150 manufacturing sites, and I'm responsible for the environmental side of the business as well as supply chain. That's why agriculture is in my long title. And with that comes big responsibilities. There's a lot of manufacturing we have in the Southern Hemisphere, particularly Africa and India, also Latin America and Southeast Asia. So most of my perspective is application of SDGs in the Southern Hemisphere, to be honest. And Scotland is very important to Diageo. We have 30 distilleries in Scotland and about 4,000 employees. So it's hugely important, and I often hold up Scotland as the kind of best practice, poster child, as it were, for brilliant stuff on sustainable development goals and sustainability more broadly, and then kind of take that learnings around the world to share appropriately, and obviously the different challenges in many of those different countries that we work in. We've obviously been very committed to those SDGs for a while. The Millennium Development Goals, I don't think anybody's mentioned them, but we were very pleased to see the SDGs come because they were relevant to business, and I think they provide the framework, the North Star, if you like, for everything we do on our sustainability and actually more broadly as a company. So that was really important to us, and we did what every company is doing, and hopefully this session is encouraging other companies to do, is to map our impacts and our priority areas of our work against the SDGs, and that's a reasonably simple process and provides a really solid, kind of meaningful framework for everything we do. and the emotional side and the logic side is, very important, particularly for employees and for our suppliers and for our stakeholders, if you like. Everybody's interested and want to see us, why are we on this planet, and what are we creating in terms of value for the planet beyond just our shareholder return. So we did that mapping, and that's really an essential piece. And we do the reporting, as you'd expect of a big global company. We report to the global GRI, and if you're really interested, you can see our recently published report, which is about 80 or 90 pages of every indicator going through one by one. That's part of the GRI G3 reporting system. So it's very thorough reporting. But I thought what I'd do is just bring to life a wee bit about, what does it mean at home? And one of our biggest and most important parts of our impact areas is water, as you'd expect. I think it's down there, SDG 6. And actually, when it was mentioned this morning about diving a bit deeper and understanding the targets and the indicators, and you dive a bit deeper into that, and you understand that it looks at the indicators and the targets look at water efficiency, they look at wastewater discharge, they look at ecosystems, they look at integrated water resource management, they look at all the areas that as a good company we should be doing anyway and reporting against anyway. And many of our peers and many of you in the room will be doing that if water is a big input into your business. So it directly relates to our water strategy, is what I'm trying to say. And so it didn't mean a whole lot of extra reporting requirements or a whole lot of extra KPIs to be measured against. It fitted naturally within our water strategy, which is comprehensive. And if you go further south into the other country we work in, we do a lot of work around access to clean water and sanitation, what they call WASH. We do a lot of work around that in Africa and India, so directly related to that in terms of an integrated water strategy. So it brought it to life, it gave it more meaning, if you like. Our water strategy, we weren't just doing it for ourselves, but we were doing it for a much bigger cause, and those SDGs provide that. I think for me the SDGs do two things. They bring a framework and a context, as we've heard, down to companies from which they can provide and analyse their impacts. So there's a downward stretch there, as it were, in terms of what really are the SDGs about, and where can I make an impact as a company, and what can I do? Well, there's a framework there and a good analytical tool, methodology, to really help companies understand what impact is. One of our big one was water, as I've just described. But also reporting upwards as well, this whole discussion about transparency and reporting and being very open and honest about where your challenges are and where your risks are. And that's also a very important part of our narrative, but clearly we've got millions of shareholders around the world, and many of them want to see this. So our report is read and it is questioned and scrutinised. So, and actually we welcome that. And our tone is very much, we're doing some good stuff, but actually there's a lot more bigger stuff we need to be doing right across our supply chain. And that's really the big thing. Right back to smallholder farmers in Africa, or glass manufacturers, or label manufacturers, or even the plastics agenda, which affects us as well. So I think for us, the real challenge, I think, for us is we do the GRI reporting and we do that global reporting. What we'd now like to understand is how we can contribute to Scotland's contribution to the SDGs, because we're a big employer and have a big footprint in Scotland. So we'd like to understand the mechanism by which we can be more local about our SDG contribution, as well as the global through the UN Global Compact. And I'm sure there'll be plenty of discussion on that later. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Can I ask, with the sustainable, or with the supply chain part of your job title, I would often suggest to SMEs, as a key driver for why they should be engaging in this agenda is because the big companies that they want to sell to care. So is that influencing purchasing decisions yet? Is it projecting down onto smaller companies that are in your supply chain?
No, I think we're quite realistic about what we can do in our supply chain. We have a kind of comprehensive supplier code, of which SDGs are mentioned, and it's more about encouragement rather than mandating. So if it's not part of our procurement decisions, I wouldn't claim that it would be. Some companies that are suppliers to us are a lot bigger than us, so we can learn from them, and actually the small ones, we can learn from them. So it's not around us sort of saying we know best and this is what you're going to do, and you've got to apply the SDGs, otherwise you're not going to supply to Diageo. It's around encouragement, and it's about measurement and reporting and then action. So I think we're a bit of a way away before we can actually really embed a kind of more robust system around that. I think we've got to understand how we're going to be reporting up and what difference we're making. Whereas I definitely come from the perspective that we've got to practice what we preach before we can in any way go to our suppliers in second and third tier. And some of those third tier suppliers might be smallholder farmers with a hectare or something. And what is important to them is not the SDGs, but is, feeding their family. So I think you have to get the perspective right, but it's certainly embedded in the way we do work. And, I suppose in the longer term, it might well be much more of a formal part of our procurement process. But at the moment, it's just about encouragement.
Okay, thank you. Andrew, over to you.
Hi, my name is Andrew Nelson, and I'm speaking on behalf of Superglass Insulation, based in Stirling. We're the manufacturer of glass mineral wool products. I'm specifically here to talk about one part of that, which is our implementation of SEPA's, one of the mechanisms, the SGA that Terry mentioned, which is one of the tools they're using for One Planet Prosperity. I joined the company 5.5 years ago. At that point, we were a loss-making company. We were non-compliant, so when Terry put his chart up above me, we were in the red section of that chart, so it's not a good place to be. And it was essentially 2 years with the economic downturn and years of lack of investment. We were really in a very bad situation. The business then obviously we managed to secure some investment and set about reducing costs, which was our strategy at the time. And there was a lot of direct economic benefit, but also environmental benefits that were kind of tied all the initiatives, reducing our energy costs, reducing our waste generation and improving the amount of recycling, trying to improve quality and reducing transportation costs. While we were trying to do all that, we were also trying to get compliant with various regulatory bodies, including SEPA. And we spent really 2 years working very hard, not only trying to get back into profit, but also to get into compliance, which we did after about 2 years, with the help of SEPA, because we had limited resource, and we really worked very closely to get to that compliance, and also with their help prioritise our activities. I think at that point, around about 2015, that strategy was not working for us. I'm not saying cost reductions is to be negated, but we were still losing money. And we really then, with our new CEO, Ken Monroe, we changed our strategy quite considerably. We sought no longer just to chase the volume and reduce costs. That couldn't be the only strategy. So we decided to invest in innovation. So we set up an innovation centre, try to improve quality by implementing an R&D lab, and more importantly, we actually put environment as a key component of that strategy, because in many ways we'd lost sight of, we sell insulation products, so for every 1 tonne of carbon dioxide we use to produce the products, it saves 200 tonnes of CO2 during its lifetime, and we insulate people's homes, and also we use 86% recycled glass from post-consumer waste. So we actually have a very strong environmental story, and we didn't put that at the core of our business. So at that time we changed the strategy, and it sort of coalesced at the same time as the SGA launch by SEPA. So the people we were dealing with brought Terry to site, and we sat down and talked about our strategy, which I've just mentioned, and the SGA, and they kind of were the same. So we pushed very hard and decided we wanted to sign an SGA, and it actually is a very specific document. It's got a lot of details in it, and it's a lot of commitments from ourselves and SEPA, and we signed up to that in March 2017. The SGA, though, is very much, Terry mentioned, for us, it isn't just about the environment, it's about economics and making money. And we made that very clear at the very beginning. I think it was one of the very first meetings that I was with Terry, our operations director, said, well, this isn't about the environment, it's actually about making money. And I think Terry replied that he was glad to hear that comment, because it isn't just a piece of paper for us, the SGA. What's interesting is that within a couple of years of that strategy, we did return. We are profitable now. The actual SGA is driven lots of benefits for us. First, obviously, return to profitability. Actually, we were bought over by an investor, and one of the key components was our compliance. And it did help secure internal investment and external investment as a result, because we could demonstrate our commitment to the SGA. And taking it even further, we actually recently, we are in the process of implementing a £43 million investment that will take the site even further beyond compliance on the back of that. And it's the other aspect for me, and it's a sort of hidden benefit of the SGA, is that it's a kind of ongoing challenge to our top management team. It's in the background, we can't let it slip, so it's a kind of a reminder of what we've made the commitment, and it kind of forces the leadership team to constantly be thinking about other improvements in our performance. So it's very much a living document for us, and it really is driving improvement. And as I said, I don't think it's any coincidence that since we've implemented that policy, we've returned to profitability.
I should have interrupted you maybe, but SGA is...
Oh, Sustainable Growth Agreement.
Okay.
Sorry.
Maybe I'm the only one that didn't know that. I inferred it was something like that. Thanks, Andrew. That's sort of for someone in my job, the holy grail is to have a story like that to show that, I mean, you cover so many of the issues, that the risk side, the opportunity side, and to have a company go from not profitable to thriving on the strength of improved environmental performance is, it's great to hear. Is there a social side as well to the SGA as far as?
Yes, we have made some commitments to work with, especially our local community, and we've started that journey with them. I suppose we were always reticent at the beginning because of the state of our business at the start of the journey. If we tried to engage too much with the local community, we'd probably have let them down. But now we are engaging with them, and we have some initiatives. And again, those are laid out in the SGA. It's a key component for SEPA and ourselves. So we were a bad neighbour for a long time. So we're starting to build some trust with our local community council.
Oh, that's great. Thanks very much. Sarah?
Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Norris.
I'm not sure that's on.
Okay. Is that better? Yeah,
There we go.
probably better. So my name is Sarah Norris, and I work for Aberdeen Standard Investments, and I run the Global Equity Impact Fund. So our impact fund sits within the ESG spectrums, where we use ESG integrated into all of our investment research, looking at environmental, social, and governance factors that help us identify risks and opportunities for our investments. And then they deliver specific client outcomes. You have ethical funds, which reflect our customers' ethics, our morals and beliefs. Then we have SRI funds, which look at the socially responsible investing side of things, and you invest in companies where you want to engage and improve their operations. And then you have impact funds, which are a combination of all three. We look at how a company is run and evaluate the ESG opportunities. Are there corporate governance policies in place? Are there human rights, environmental policies in place? But beyond just looking at how a company operates itself, we look at what a company manufactures and what products or solutions they deliver. And we want these products and solutions to deliver intentional, measurable, positive social and environmental outcomes. And there's so many different issues in the world today that you could define social and environmental outcomes any number of ways. So what we've done is we've taken the Sustainable Development Goals as a framework to identify the most pressing issues that the world faces today and invest in companies who run themselves well, are good corporate citizens, but then actively invest in solutions that are going to solve some of these challenges, whether that's water, energy, health and social care. We really believe that all 17 goals are investable, and that's why we've created a framework that uses 8 broad themes to invest across all 17 goals, delivering on the 3 key issues of unsustainable consumption and production, climate change, and rising inequalities. And one of the key issues with impact investing and what differentiates it from other types of sustainable investing is the measurable social and environmental outcomes. And again, we use the Sustainable Development Goals and the key performance indicators that are part of the goals to really help identify what indicators we should be measuring and assessing companies and their performance on delivering solutions to these goals. So this allows us then to take the data that companies provide us and measure that to country solutions. Because the Sustainable Development Goals at the end of the day are for countries. They're not for companies, but they're a brilliant framework that can be adapted for companies to be able to report how they're delivering solutions at a country level. So using these indicators, we can measure how a company is delivering outcomes for countries. For example, account penetration as a key tenet of financial inclusion. We can look at a country like Kenya and say of all accounts created for underserved individuals, the companies that we are investing in have contributed to 32% of all accounts created. And that really is delivering on an outcome. It's taking the data that companies are providing those outputs and translating them into outcomes to show how we are helping the world achieve the Sustainable Development Goals.
Thanks very much. Every time I think of a question I was going to ask you, you'd answer it. So we're going to just move on to Julia, and I believe you have slides. There you go. I'll let you, the green button, and there we go.
Good morning. Good morning, I should say. My name's Julia Adamson. I've worked with Cairn Energy across their corporate responsibility programs now for 16 years, I think it is. If you're not familiar with Cairn, I just thought I'd tell you a little bit about it. It's an independent oil and gas explorer, developer and producer. We've explored, discovered and developed oil and gas and produced it throughout the world and built up quite a body of experience, both as operator and as a joint venture partner in all those phases of the oil and gas life cycle. Cairn Energy has been listed on the London Stock Exchange for almost 30 years now, but it's headquartered here in Edinburgh, with offices around the world, also in London, Norway, Senegal, and most recently we've opened an office in Mexico City. Cairn has had a commitment to working responsibly for, well, as long as I've been there, and towards a strategy of delivering value for our range of stakeholders, whether they be our investors, the host governments that we work with, local communities, our employees, and obviously business partners. This way of what we call working responsibility built us a strong record of adding value in India over almost 20 years, through the 1990s and straddling across into this century or millennium. In India, we made a significant contribution to developing India's oil and gas reserves, growing its oil and gas industry and energy security for the country, as well as obviously generating a considerable amount of dollars in revenue for the Indian government. But alongside that, we also developed a number of programs. A few examples of those were an enterprise centre in Barmer in Rajasthan, which was the site of our most significant discoveries and production. This enterprise centre was funded by ourselves and the International Finance Corporation and delivered training on business skills to over 3,000 people in that area, not only to support our growing industry, but also to stimulate economic growth more generally within the region. We also partnered with a NGO looking at traditional agricultural activities and helping local farmers build cooperatives and register with them. Mobile health initiatives were another area for the remote areas and villages of Rajasthan, bringing health services to communities that would otherwise have had none or very little. Rajasthan, if you know your geography of India, and I won't be testing it, is a very dry region, includes the Thar Desert, and one of our other big projects with local communities was, again through a local NGO, to develop rainwater harvesting and storage facilities to enable local communities to have local access to water. At this time, through the 90s and early 2000s, we were guided in what partnerships we made and the responsibilities as a company that we undertook by what we called a human rights aware approach. And this in particular formed the way in which we worked with regional water authorities to improve access to water, and our relationship with state security forces in the state of Bihar in India. But it's the publication of the SDGs that we're obviously talking about today, and that's come subsequent to our involvement in India. But what that's given us as Cairn Energy, and in fact the oil and gas industry, is a framework which allows us to more effectively assess how we impact on the SDGs and the value of the activities that we can actually bring within a bigger picture, not just locally, but regionally, nationally, and potentially global sustainable development. So following the publication of the SDGs and recognising that within it was a call for private enterprise to actually contribute to the SDGs, which I think was a move on from the Millennium Development Goals, Cairn commissioned a review to do this. I think people have referred to it as a mapping, so identifying any of our activities which could actually impact on those goals and other ways in which perhaps our activities could support those goals. This is an approach we're now using around all our global assets at that local country level. And in practice, what that means is that we review the SDGs with host governments' priorities and programs, and the SDGs give that framework again around that dialogue, and seeing where our activities can impact their goals and where we can add value to them. And from this, we actually determine our own objectives and programs for our business operations and our social investments. And I've got another, second and last, I promise, slide, in which I've just highlighted some of the things, the specific programs we've been working on in Senegal in the last few years. 2014, Cairn made a significant oil and gas discovery offshore Senegal. Indeed, it was the first oil and gas discovery offshore Senegal. And with those operations being offshore, it's coastal communities dependent particularly on fishing that have particular concerns about our oil and gas activities and the potential that they have to add impacts onto what is an already struggling industry. The Sustainable Development Goals have helped us focus on the things within Senegal's own priorities and local priorities. And we've been working with an NGO called the Hunger Project, who have a holistic program to actually empowering communities to take the lead on their own development, particularly through the empowerment of women, through training, organisation of communities, promoting the collaboration to take their own road towards improving sanitation, healthcare services, access to finance, to build income-generating activities beyond the fishing industry. We're also supporting tertiary education initiatives, primarily from the business point of view to provide skills to the oil and gas sector. As I said, we were the first major oil and gas discovery offshore Senegal in 2014. It doesn't have a history of a strong oil and gas industry, and we've been working with education, the University of Dakar, to provide local skills training for students who will hopefully in the future participate in the industry and in perhaps the management of that industry as well. We're also looking at our supply chain. We're actually a small company. I think we had about 180 employees worldwide last year. Contractors form a big part of actually executing all our operations. And we've been working across industry with other oil and gas operators in Senegal and another NGO called Invest in Africa to actually build a platform that will improve access for local companies to participate in oil and gas contracts. Skills development to help those businesses actually compete for those contracts as well, and providing the training on required standards around, I think, Goal 8 in terms of decent work, including quality, health, safety, and human rights. Lastly, the oil and gas industry does pay tax, you'll be pleased to hear. But most significantly, we also pay significant revenues when we come to the business of producing oil and gas, which form quite significant inputs to the treasuries of host governments. Where that money's gone in the past has not always been successful, and we've long supported the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, and particularly in Senegal. We've been working with the government of Senegal, who also support the initiative, on the multi-stakeholder group towards that transparent reporting of what we pay. So that's a very brief and very whirlwind tour through Cairn's activities around the globe. And I look forward to the discussion that comes.
Thanks, Julia. Let's get one more click. I'm going to have to ask, I think before someone else does, obviously your sector is has some challenges, particularly around Goal 13. And so we should, I think it's really helpful to see how all of the positive impacts that your company and the sector can have, but clearly there are negative impacts in theory to be mitigated. Could you give us a bit on how you answer the climate change challenge? Yeah.
And it's absolutely right. The consensus is that the use of fossil fuel. This one. Hello.
There we go.
Yes, the consensus is that the use of fossil fuels over the last century and into this century is seen as the major contributor to climate warming. And obviously we produce the products that do just that. What we also recognise is that access to energy is key to economic and social and human development, and part of and the key element is that oil and gas will still need to make that contribution through the next 20, 30 years, certainly beyond the timescale of the social development goals. That's not to say that we're blind to what the product's history is, but it is a key element to that balancing of all these goals. And I think that's what we feel the Sustainable Development Goals give us, is a great framework that actually balances not just what we can contribute to positively, but balancing the whole bigger picture of where our impacts lie as well, whether that be in our waste management, climate change, or whatever. And seeing where the positive elements of energy production, which still will come from oil and gas in the predominance through certainly the next 2 decades, and that transition towards a lower carbon economy.
Thank you. Over to you. Any questions? Yeah. Yeah, leave us 2. That would be great.
Hi, thank you. My name's Rachel McEwen. I'm from energy company SSE, and I've actually got 2 questions, if that's okay. The first is to Sarah, and it relates to investors, and there's no doubt there has been this trend over the last few years of greater investor scrutiny on environmental social governance issues, which is very welcome. I suppose my concern is it's not the people who are investing in sustainable things I'm worried about, it's the other ones. And if you were looking into the future and you were thinking about your job in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, what do you think is going to be the trends that will be influencing what you do? Do you mind if I ask the second question as well, which is the second question is about the SDGs in general. Now, I suppose the SDG's greatest strength is it's the sort of comprehensiveness and the sophistication and complexity of this, which is brilliant, and it makes sense because you can't solve the world's greatest challenges easily. These are difficult. But I also wonder if that's also its weakness. And if you think about the Millennium Development Goals, they maybe captured the imagination. I remember being on a demonstration to make poverty history back in 2005, and there were, tens of thousands of people on these demonstrations. And you're not seeing the same thing with this. But then my question is, but does that matter? Because perhaps the MDGs weren't as impactful as these ones are.
Thanks, Rachel.
So if I start on the trends, my hope is that the trends are towards more impact products, socially responsible products, ethical ESG products. And my co-manager isn't here, but he's deputy head of the global team. And what we tell investors is that we don't want this global impact product to be a niche product. We want it to cannibalize our existing global core funds and become the main strategy for Aberdeen Standard Investments. And if you listen to what our co-CEOs have said about the future of investing, impact is one of the key themes, and we're looking at it across other asset classes. So we've launched it in equities, we're looking at private markets, we're looking at fixed income. So this isn't just a one-off, a way to grab assets, if you will. This isn't impact washing. We are not taking existing products and putting an impact label on them. We are developing a new process that we're rolling out across the entire organization as a way to look at our investments and make sure that we are investing in companies and investment opportunities that are actively delivering solutions. And at the moment, the Sustainable Development Goals, they are flawed. We can debate that. I think that's a theoretical debate. And the UN itself, there are issues there. But at the moment, that is the organization with the most credibility in terms of determining what are the most pressing issues. So until we have a better alternative, I think we need to continue to use the Sustainable Development Goals and use the UN because it does provide a harmonization of language. You've heard us all talk about frameworks and guide plans and map for the future. And as soon as we all start using the same language and we all start talking about the same end goals, there's a massive power of capital in terms of allocation. And the Millennium Development Goals were fantastic, but they weren't for the world. They were for emerging markets, for developing nations. The Sustainable Development Goals are for us all. And I think you're seeing a greater weight, certainly in my industry, in the investment community, behind the Sustainable Development Goals because they are more investable, if you will. You're able to find companies and investment opportunities that align themselves with the goals and with these key pressing issues globally, rather than, it's a lot harder for a company to say we are only going to invest in an emerging market because that has the greatest need. And you're almost saying which person deserves help more. Is it the impoverished community in Boston, for example, or is it the impoverished community in Africa? Who has the bigger need? And this allows us to not have to make that choice. I don't know if
Great.
Potentially a company might have a
This one.
different opinion.
Well, just to your second question, it's a pretty important question. I think I agree with what you said in terms of it being relevant to everybody, but for me, it's the SDGs, and I suppose the Millennium Development Goals will hold business more accountable. They're more business relevant, and the level of detail. Some people go look at the 169 indicators and all the targets that go behind that. But I think it speaks the language of business, and I think business better understand how they can contribute now, as opposed to the Millennium Development Goals seemed great cause, but they were a cause that weren't necessarily relevant to an individual business or sector. So I think that accountability is really important. That's why the reporting piece that I mentioned is equally important. But trying to make it relevant to businesses is really difficult. And where do that prioritization of the goals and the indicators within the goals, I think is key, which is why I mentioned water, bringing it down to water efficiency and things like that, and making it more tangible, I suppose, rather than big clean water and access for everybody. To Steve's point, there's a lot under each goal, and if companies can look at that and understand how their operations and their impact relate to those individual targets, I think it's much more meaningful than the kind of the big top 17, as it were. But it is that challenge of making it relevant to people on the ground that have got limited resources, want to do the right thing, but how do they? And I think SDGs do, the tools around that are a lot better than the MDGs anyway.
Anyone else? Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something about the kind of structural issues that we're facing right now in terms of engaging with governments in the UK around the SDGs. And I think that very clearly there is a hangover from the Millennium Development Goals and where the responsibility sits with government to ensure that monitoring, reporting and promotion of the SDGs is carried through. If we look at the UK government right now, you'll see that the leads for SDGs and reporting on a national and international level is Department for International Development. And I think that sends a signal that to other organisations that this is not a priority for the UK government. And if we look at Scotland, closer to home, up until recently, again, the responsibility is solely sat with the International Development team. Right now, we've just been kind of given the news that we now have a lead contact working on this within the Scottish Government, a lead team, the National Performance Unit team, who will be taking forward work. And I think that that's really important because what it does is it shows that actually government is bringing that to the core of what it does at a national level. And with Scotland's National Performance Framework, I think that that provides the real opportunity to show organisations that this is now part of the programme for government. And I think whilst the last 4 years or 3 years has been quite slow, and even I think the last year, the amount of changes happening in Scotland around this agenda, I imagine what it will be like in a couple of years, and I think it really is a case of organisations and sectors catching up.
It was in fact a key recommendation from Measuring Up, the UK SSD report, to shift the ownership of the goals within government to the Cabinet Office so that we could have an SDG czar, as it were, with cross-departmental powers so that we could ensure policy coherence and no one being left behind and so on. And certainly, fingers crossed, they're listening and taking that on board. We've had secretaries of state from DFID speak, and as Paul put it, that's the MDG hangover is a good way of phrasing it. It's still very much oriented towards international development rather than the domestic agenda for these goals. And certainly that's, I think, where we come in, is we need to make it alive here in the UK. Another. Yeah. Oh, behind.
I was lucky there, I was nearest the mic.
Yeah.
I've got 2 questions. The first one, I'm afraid, is very much aimed at Paul, so you don't get a choice in this one. I wonder whether you thought there needed to be a slight shift in kind of the behaviour of charities, because the corporate account manager, the person who works with sectors, is invariably a middle manager, member of the fundraising team, and not necessarily empowered to think in the way that's required to kind of work in partnership for these goals. And I don't know what you think is necessary from the third sector to kind of be able to be a really effective partner and collaborate in that way. And also, if they do that really well, is there a real risk in terms of their funding? Because obviously they do need funding to do stuff. And then the second question, I think maybe Michael, Julia may have a view on this, but it's around the global and the local aspect. So I've been known to enjoy the odd dram, and there's some amazing things that happen locally at distilleries where the one in Balmoral and Isla, you know, the excess heat goes and warms the local swimming pool. That's, you know, and there's lots of brilliant examples like that. How do you, in a massive sort of global entity, how do you empower that kind of local partnership and working on the ground whilst at the same time dealing with these global goals and kind of what you do at the corporate global level?
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for your question. And I was really pleased to hear your presentation earlier on, because just everything kind of clicked with me, what you were saying about partnership stuff. I guess in terms of third sector organisations working with businesses, I think that when working with the Sustainable Development Goals, to be honest, I get most traction around the SDGs around people who are kind of middle management or officer grade or senior officer grade, and less so with senior management. And I think that's, you know, there's a lot of cynicism around things linked to the United Nations, around global programs that maybe don't apply to Scotland, and that's definitely something that I've seen come through. But I think that in terms of the third sector, resources are always tight, so we have limited staff working in teams, and it does make sense for fundraising to be carrying out that particular role. But I guess the way I see the third sector organisations changing, and having changed, I feel over the last 5 years, is definitely flatter structures and flatter, more opportunities for staff to feel empowered to be able to take certain decisions and be able to lead certain agendas. So I think that that's the way you're going to bring fresh thinking into the third sector, is by flattening those structures and making sure that people of all grades and all responsibilities can have a role to play in the future of that organisation. And just to recognise that knowledge and experience comes from many different levels and many different places. And I think that those organisations that don't do that will very clearly be left behind, and people won't want to work with them.
Well, I'll just start. It's a good question around global and local, and I think certainly from my perspective, I can only talk from Diageo's, we're nothing without the local activity, and our job is really to contextualise that local activity, as it were, within the Sustainable Development Goals and within our strategy. So we have the Sustainable Development Goals, we have our global strategy, which is, we're a very decentralised business, so we have 21 markets around the world. Europe is one market, and they very much have their own P&Ls, their own managing directors, and a lot of autonomy. And they set their own priorities within the global framework, as it were, and that global framework for us, our strategy, is then set within the SDGs. And what we can do, though, is, and so they will have local priorities everywhere, whether they're in Ethiopia or South Africa or Argentina or Australia, they'll have their local priorities clearly, again, and they've mapped their activities and their footprint, as it were, against what the SDGs and our strategy is. What we can do globally, and we're a very small global team, is influence the development of those. So take smallholder farming in Ghana. We can start to try and encourage, for example, greater gender diversity and impact measurement around that. Now, that's maybe not something that they immediately thought was a priority, because they're trying to get good quality grains to the brewery, and those are the priorities, and they do good work within the local farmers, but have they actually looked at female empowerment within the farming communities and what we can do as a big global company with that? And so we can do that, and we can influence the themes in which they're working at and encourage that. And that's only what we can do, is encourage. We can't mandate, we encourage the local activities. But also we provide a global framework for reporting, what we call our social impact framework reporting database and, tool platform, so that everybody, all the countries are reporting in the same way. The number of beneficiaries, the economic benefits, the social benefits, the community benefits, if you like. So we always say to our markets, as we describe them, we're nothing without your activity and your investment, and all their investments are made at a local level. So we don't have a global foundation that we fund lots of different projects around the world in. We don't have that foundation anymore. Those projects and those programs and the embedding of the SDGs, if you like, is clearly up to the local markets to do in the way they feel fit. But what we do provide is those themes that are thread through many of our programs, and also that reporting framework, which I think is important for them to understand what impact they're having relative to the SDGs. And I think that's a really important part of what we can do. But as I say, we're very small globally, and all the activity and all the impact we're having is local.
Yeah, I would concur pretty much with what you're saying. Again, Cairn it operates at a country level with a small corporate group here in Edinburgh, and it's corporately we're setting the framework, and the framework we're using is now the Sustainable Development Goals, and it's at local level that we look at what the particular priorities or challenges are there within those goals and national priorities, and where our activities or our strengths or what we have fit in. And it just occurred to me probably a couple of examples of perhaps how we've done that. Perhaps before the Sustainable Development Goals, when we were in India, and I mentioned it just briefly, that also helping us underpin determining what we do and what we should do and what government should do. We have this, what we call a rights-aware approach. And I hope this is a good example, is that I was talking about the water issue in the Rajasthan desert, where we looked at that in terms of it will still relate to Sustainable Development Goals, in terms of the right to water, obviously being a key to human health. we looked at that in terms of, well, what was our responsibility? We wanted to use water, not fresh water, but saline water to support our reservoirs. There was obviously a great deal of concern about whether using saline water and were we really using saline water and not the scarce freshwater resources of the area, or whether we could affect those. And we looked at that in terms of whose responsibility was this to get water to the communities. And we could see that clearly was it's a government responsibility to provide for that right to life, essentially, and right to access to water. But we looked at where we fitted in sort of the 3 tiers, which I think fit back again in some of the presentation we saw earlier, of what was essential, what we had to do in terms of to comply with the law, get our permits, what was essential. But then beyond that, what did our stakeholders actually expect of us? What did the government expect of us in India? What did local communities expect of us? And how could we actually contribute to that? And there were key things through that process and applying that framework that we could say, well, we're pretty good at drilling holes in the ground and knowing what to do to get oil out. It's not quite very different to what you need to do to get water out of the ground, looking for it, working out whether you can get it out, whether you can sustain that production, how you complete those wells for efficiency. We could share a lot of that information and that mentoring around water extraction within Rajasthan and through the water authorities. Beyond that, we looked at something that we called a desirable, so expectations of our stakeholders, but what could we do beyond that even, perhaps to be leading the approach. And that was what we found. Well, actually, when it came down to it in Rajasthan, we knew more about what was under the ground than the water board certainly did. And what we could do was we gave our proprietary information about our knowledge of geology, of the hydrology of the area, to actually increase the capacity of the regional water board to provide access to water for the greater region of Rajasthan. And it's that sort of matching at the very local level, but within the framework set at a global level. And in a similar way, I touched on what we were doing in Senegal at the moment with the fishing industry. It's suffering from changes, which we might say are climate changes, in terms of warming waters, diminishing, overfishing. The government priorities are around building back that industry, diversifying people from the industry to other ways of generating income to support themselves. And that's through those priorities we look to we've been working with the government and the NGO sector to actually see how we can support that through the Hunger Project. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Okay, I think you were next. Oh, have you already given the mic away? Okay, right here, no, in front. There we go.
Hi. So it's quite interesting to understand the entire reporting procedure and the way you capture these indicators. But with the increased emphasis on sustainability reporting, where does this panel feel the voluntary aspect of reporting? Where's the future moving towards? Because I think there's a strong emphasis to include various aspects of sustainability within the report. What is the future of voluntary reporting coming to?
Okay, and there was one over here. Could we just pass the mic over and then we'll get to, all right.
Thanks, actually relates to that quite well. So I think obviously there's a benefit to businesses reporting on what they're doing well against the Sustainable Development Goals, but I was just wondering what benefit there is to businesses to reporting what they're not doing well and what their shortcomings are.
Thank you. Any volunteers? Michael, can I pick on you? Because I know you've got a big reporting dynamic in your component.
I'll get it started, but sorry, the first question, voluntary reporting. I think large global businesses, it should be mandatory. So we're of view, I think when DEFRA brought in mandatory carbon reporting, maybe 4 years ago, was it now, under the Companies Act, we were big supporters of that. So it's easy for us to say as a big company, and so I caveat that, but I think there is a an increasing expectation of improved and more transparent reporting by companies, and we've got the Task Force for Financial Climate-Related Disclosure, TCFD, coming now, which all big major companies are looking at, and I think that's a great. It's a bit of a carrot at the moment. I think it will be a stick soon, and I think companies recognise that. And some major investors have already come out and said they will not invest in companies such as Aviva and others. They won't invest in companies unless they're following. That just relates to climate change, but climate change, the interrelation and interdependencies you mentioned, it's related to many of the goals. And I think the piece around targets, which is nicely sort of dovetails with that, is really important. And some of the target reporting you get, some of the reporting you get is very sort of smoothed over the edges and is a kind of PR document to say, aren't we wonderful? And I think if you set numerical targets, you can't hide. And I think we've been encouraged to do, we basically do that a lot wherever we can. Trying numerical targets in all areas of impact is very difficult, but we apply that because of two things. A, we can be very transparent in our reporting and you can't get away from the numbers. And secondly, it embeds within the business processes, which everything else is run by numbers and KPIs and performance. Therefore, sustainability should be no different from any other business process and should be prioritised just as other KPIs are prioritised. So it's twofold. And I think when your numbers are bad, your numbers are bad. It's just like financial reporting. There's no way of getting around it. So that doesn't really answer all your questions. I think there's a lot to be said for integrated reporting, for example, getting away from just sustainability reporting and moving into integrated corporate reporting, which is a move that many are taking. But I also think that companies just need to adopt a more humble tone in terms of the way they're reporting sometimes. And that's when your figures aren't good and your financials aren't good or your sustainability reporting is not great, then that's really where you have to be. You can't avoid being transparent. But transparency is really important. And I think accepting where the challenges are and the issues ahead is a way in which companies can tell the truth but not scare investors, because that's the other challenge they face, because they don't want to raise a whole lot of issues which might not be that material to the investors, but the investors might get concerned about, if that makes sense. Sorry, I'm speaking on behalf of investors.
Well, I can speak to our equity impact fund, and as I said, we use the sustainable development KPIs to inform our indicators, but I think listed companies have a thankless task of trying to juggle all the different demands for data, because it's constantly more data, different data, and in my mind it's a better data. So it's up to us as investors to work together to harmonise our requests. What are we looking for? What are the main issues and the main indicators that we want reported on? So we are part of several different working groups within the UK with Bridgers Ventures and then more internationally with the UNPRI, and trying to find that harmonisation. But the way we approach reporting is we set ourselves very stringent targets that we want to see companies measure that are linked to their financials. So when we're looking at companies that would qualify for being an impact company, we're looking at where they're investing, and we want to see a material amount of investment directed towards products and services that align with one of our different impact themes. And then we're also looking at where else they're investing. So not to pick on the two industries, but investing in oil and gas and investing in alcohol, that goes against the parameters that we have set for our impact portfolio, because we are focused on products and services. We're not looking at the operations of the businesses and the fantastic things that they can do in terms of work with local communities, water conservation. So it's being very, very stringent in terms of your targets, and for us as investors as well as for the corporate, setting targets so that you as consumers can really hold us to account both on the financial side and the non-financial side. There's no screen for any of it. It all comes down to manual labour and being able to pick and choose the different data points. So as long as we are transparent about what we're doing, I completely agree that that's the only way we are going to progress in terms of reporting on positive impact and also positive alignment with one of the Sustainable Development Goals.
Yeah, and I would just echo what's been said. It's a huge task, an ever-increasing task to report in line with investors' requirements. I like to hear that you think you should all get together and ask us the same questions. The GRI is significant, and those all need to be done. But I think those are, and we are getting smarter, both from the people that are asking the questions and how we're reporting, in terms of looking at what's material. That's not just material in a financial sense, but material to other stakeholders, which would affect their decisions. We can't, to the second question, get away without discussing challenges as well as successes. I think it's fair to say that probably here in different companies we've been challenged on not taking or giving enough information that certain stakeholders want. And so an important part of that reporting is understanding the information that stakeholders are looking for.
We're running out of time. I'm going to abuse my authority and pick on Andrew because you've had a bit of an easy ride, I'm afraid. But I think, your story is so interesting, so there's a couple of things that I want to learn a bit more about, and one related to the reporting question. Mm-hmm. Is there a reporting requirement in your SGA? And are you doing reporting to the public or just to SEPA?
Yes, there's a reporting requirement, and it's quite, for us, we were quite insistent, as for SEPA, to be fair, that there was actually measurable targets in there. I mean, to be blunt, if they weren't there, it was a pointless document for us and SEPA, to be honest. So we were both parties were insistent. And to be honest, we've met most of the requirements. We've missed some, and they are published. But for us, the real issue is that if you really believe in it, you shouldn't hide from the failures, because for us, it's then, well, how are we going to address them? If we really believe those targets were important to put in an SGA, then if we fail to meet them, then what are we going to do to make up the gap? So for us, there was no problem putting those requirements in, and they're a challenge. And for us, they're a moving challenge. So I've mentioned the investment we're going through. That will totally change our targets. We're not going to rest in our laurels. So yes, it is in the public domain, and we don't hide from that.
Great. And one more. I'm under no illusions that companies can do good things without the SDGs. They were doing good things before the SDGs came along, and I think it sounds like your SGA predated the SDGs. So I'm just wondering, at what point did that was it this morning? Was it last year, 2 years ago? At what point did the SDGs enter the frame, and has it been helpful?
Well, in our particular case, I suppose, and I kind of mentioned at the start, we were already on that path. It was almost like we were in parallel, and it was perfect timing for us with the SEPA's One Planet Prosperity Scheme, or strategy, sorry, and the tool, the Sustainable Growth Agreement, SGA, was being developed at the time we were on that journey. So we were they happened at a perfect time for us. I said, if the SGAs had been launched a couple of years earlier, we wouldn't have been in a position to even engage. So we'd started on that process.
So it's been all along?
Yeah.
Great.
I would say, well, since I've been with the business, so that's been probably in the last 3 years.
Great. Okay, I feel I owe you a minute each or so, if you want to get a final little bit of a gem that you want to project out to the world. You don't have to, but Paul, did you want to say a final word before we?
Yeah, I guess I'd go back to what I said at the beginning about trying to create a sense of unity across sectors around the SDGs, and to really make it an impossible task for our governments to ignore them, and to not take our contribution seriously as well. And I think that, the last 3 years we haven't seen enough activity from government around the SDGs. They haven't had this in their head. The fact there's only 4 people working on this in the UK government says it all. So I think that we need to put pressure on, and government will listen if they see both business and civil society working together on a shared goal of realising the potential of the SDGs.
Thank you.
I think just to very quickly repeat what I said about prioritisation within the SDGs, and they can be a bit overwhelming, and if you go onto the website, there's just report after report and toolkit after toolkit, and it seems, oh crikey, where do I ever start? So many companies in the room will be further on the journey than others, but I think that prioritisation and the relevance to the business and the business impacts is absolutely critical. And one other observation, listening to Paul, is how can businesses work closer to the third sector or to the voluntary sector, or how can we use our experience both in terms of government engagement or indeed engagement through our supply chain, to your earlier point about how can we influence our supply chains, because they're much bigger than ourselves. So there's a lot of rich ground here for discussion and I think progress, but it's very optimistic.
Thank you.
I think from my perspective, the key thing was the close work we did with the government via SEPA, and in very basic terms, we returned to profitability by following that programme, and it makes sense. It's as simple as that.
Thank you.
Yes, from my point of view, it's that the Sustainable Development Goals, they are global. It's in the name, and it's every one person has a contribution they can make, whether that's aligning your investments or challenging your own business, is to adopt the different themes, the different goals, and trying to find the ones that you can most push and make a difference in. And it's one person does matter. The greater demand for impact investing, sustainable investing, the greater number of products that are going to be out there. And if there's demand, other financial institutions will come up with products to meet that demand, but it really has to come from every individual in the room asking for it. So it is a one person can make a difference scenario.
I'd just like to say it's the most difficult place to come up with the last top tip.
Sorry.
So really, I'm probably just going to repeat the top tips there. It is a great framework for opening dialogue within the company, at whatever your local level is, and opening those partnerships and that collaboration. The things that I've described today in terms of the things that Cairn Energy does are small elements towards the global development goals. It is that part of these goals set a framework where we can all make our small little development, but we can actually see how that can contribute to hopefully even potentially global sustainable development.
Thank you all very much. I wish we had more time. It's been really fascinating. Colin and I have a few more slides to whip through. To save your necks, I will ask you to return down there. We do have another sort of till 1:30 to do some more networking downstairs, so I hope that we may eat into that by a couple of minutes. But then if you have more questions, I'm sorry we couldn't get to you, but you may be able to catch up with these guys down there. Okay, this section is a bit more specifically some tools and specific means for companies to get involved. So Colin, I will hand over to you, and you don't need to rush so much. I'll do my best to make up for the most time on my slides. Okay.
Thank you. So I mentioned earlier on I have a little business that helps companies understand why and how they should support the Sustainable Development Goals. And I guess it was created out of a frustration that there's no end of talk about the SDGs. There's no end of talk about why they're important and we all need to do something, but there's a little less about how. So Brendan asked an interesting question earlier on about what tools can people use. And I noticed Michael mentioned it's a bit daunting when you go on the website and there's like toolkit after toolkit and paper after paper, and some of these are pretty big. So I'm from Blackpool. Anybody here ever been to Blackpool? Lovely place, isn't it? Fairly down-to-earth little town, and I have what I call my Blackpool pub test, which is that if you go into a pub in Blackpool, there's generally not big discussions about natural capital or anything like that going on. So I figure that anything that we come up with has to be simple enough that you can go and explain it in a pub to somebody in Blackpool, and they can at least get the rough idea. So we have a really simple framework we look at, which is 4 steps. I call this my Simon model. If anybody's old enough to remember that little game of Simon that lights up and you hit the buttons, because it looks a bit like that. So the first thing is about identifying the goals that matter most to your business. And that's kind of interesting. I hear a lot of discussion about alignment and mapping, and that's important. But this isn't always just about taking your existing CSR or sustainability strategy and mapping it to the goals. This is about looking at what's material to your business. So what's important to your business, what's important to your stakeholders, and crucially, how much can you go and contribute to this? And often that is the same as your sustainability strategy, because if your strategy's already been done through a materiality process, it's possibly covered this, but possibly it's not. It's an interesting exercise to go through. You often end up with some quite different results. So I've seen a few companies that kind of focus on selling products that are, manufactured products, but they'll look and say that their priority goals are around the environmental side of it. It's more important to go and look at what you sell and what your business does and how you're doing these things to go and look at the goals that are most important. Once you've identified those, because that's not a hard process, the harder bit is actually making a commitment to do something. So this is about saying we are going to go and take action. And again, sometimes this is about taking an existing target you've got and maybe looking at how that supports the goals. But sometimes it's about doing something different. If, for example, you've identified that gender equality is a very important goal for your business, have you got a target on that? Have you made a commitment? If it's really important, consider doing it. It's something that should be done. This is really the bit that takes a little bit of bravery, some good internal discussions, those harder discussions with business leaders, but done in the right way and made simple enough, it is possible to go and do this. The third bit is about measuring your contribution. So if you've done the first two bits, this isn't quite so bad. Once you know what it is you're measuring, once you know what your priorities are, once you know what your commitments are, then measuring is a little bit more straightforward. Steve alluded to there are 232 indicators for the goals. They weren't really created for businesses, to be honest with you. So there's a little bit of using what's available and then looking at better indicators. But there is a process of measuring these. And then the last bit is sharing with people what you're doing. And I always try and say that reporting is not communication. Reporting is important, but communications is a very different thing. You can produce the best sustainability report in the world, but if it's read by 10 people, what change is that making? Going back to Steve's slide, if 73% of the UK population haven't heard about the goals, we maybe have a bit of an obligation to go and communicate that as effectively as we can do. So if big brands are talking about the goals and talking about doing good things, that gets people chatting in pubs, that gets people chatting in schools, it gets people chatting in other businesses, and that's what we need. So I'm not saying don't report. Sustainability reports are incredibly important, integrated reports potentially more so, but communicate as well, use social media, use all the tools that you've got at your disposal. So all that's a nice little framework, but the important bit is actually doing things. So it's about taking action. And I think taking action in your own operations it's quite a mature thing now. A lot of people understand how to measure their environmental impact. We've got gender pay gap reporting, so we understand reporting on equality. We have a lot of things in place, but where I ask people to go and focus is on their products and their supply chain. Because realistically, that's where you make the biggest difference. It's what you are selling to consumers. It's what you are selling to other businesses. It's how that makes a difference in the world. It's where you source your materials from. So building the goals into these different aspects is absolutely key. And I think as you mentioned earlier on, Michael, it isn't always a matter of mandating this. It's just a matter of encouraging. Telling people the fact the goals actually even exist. Telling people you care about them. I'd love to see Thomas the Tank Engine and friends recently talking about the goals. That's the kind of communication that's great. I'm not saying anybody here can easily do exactly the same thing, but the more it can be highlighted, then the more people understand it, and then the better action we get. Over to you.
I'm going to talk fast, so you don't need to go far. I mentioned this earlier, but I want to just follow up on that because I think that point about encouraging is so important, because if you're sitting in a small company and your big customer lets it be known to you that they care about this, connect the dots. It's pretty obvious that you should start caring about it too. And so I think just by communicating that you care about this agenda is a really powerful force for change. I mentioned SDG matrices earlier. This is the sectoral approach to the goals. There's a link there. We're going to share the slides so you can download all of these from UNGC or KPMG site. Another piece of work that UNGC did was the blueprint for business leadership on the SDGs. It's a huge 178 pager, but there's a more interactive website there that allows you to dip in and out. The view here was, again, we heard Sarah talk about SDG washing, and the whole point of this is to nip that in the bud. If you're going to be an SDG leader, this is defining what that means, and it speaks to additionality and really stepping up. So definitely worth a read. This came up earlier, the reporting document. So there's a link where you can download it. This was the first piece in the puzzle, and as I said, the subsequent publication has just come out. So there's a bunch of material available on reporting. UNGC has an SDGs Pioneer program where basically you've missed 2018, but for 2019, if you feel you're really doing great things on the SDGs, watch this space. You can nominate yourself to be an SDG Pioneer. You'll be wined and dined and feted around the world as an SDG leader. 10 are chosen from around the world, and it's quite an honor. There were 2 from the UK last year from very small companies, BioBean and AidTech, 2 SMEs from the UK that made the cut. So definitely could be good for your business and good for the world too. If you're supposed to be a sustainability expert, and particularly expert in the SDGs, but find sometimes your knowledge isn't up to what you think it ought to be, here's a really handy iPhone app that allows you to discreetly have a look at what are the targets for any particular goal when you need to. So this also comes from Project Everyone. I find it very useful, so I recommend it to you. And then back to Colin for the...
You know, I haven't got that app actually. That sounds quite useful. Could do with that one. Yeah, quite proud that today we are launching yet another tool. But this one I think you'll quite like. This is pretty cool. So one of the questions that we continually get asked is what businesses are doing what on the SDGs? So who's doing good things? What are they up to? How do we go and inspire people with these kind of things? So we're launching www.supportthegoals.org today. We've done this in partnership with UN Global Compact, with Institute Chartered Accountants Scotland, Integrated Reporting Council, Durham University Business School, and then a lot of other people who I'll probably run out of time if I try and mention. But it's a really simple website. You can go on there, and it does 3 simple things. So, inspiration. The homepage has stories, lots and lots of them. Every time you go to the site, those stories change. There are several hundred of them on there. So, if you want to go and get people to be a little bit inspired about what the goals are about, click on a story. They're all short, about 300 to 500 words. Really simple. They're not very technical at all. They're designed for a fairly lay audience, so business leaders. And they could look at it and go, oh, that's cool. That's really nice. Oh, that looks at that target in the Sustainable Development Goals. That's what they're about. So there's a bit of nice inspiration through there. Secondly, what it does is it provides a bit of research. So what we want to try and do is to go and look at what industry leaders, what innovators and what everyday businesses are all doing around the goals. So we've started off by looking at the industry leaders. We've started with the FTSE 350. There's a few people in here who work for FTSE 350 businesses. We've been looking at what they're doing on the goals, and we've got 4 very simple things that we look at. So what plans are they making? What commitments are they making? What actions are they taking? And what progress are they sharing? All this is based on their public reporting. So if there is no mention of the SDGs in their plans whatsoever, that gets a red. If they mention the SDGs, it gets an amber. If they've selected specific priority goals, that gets a green. So similar with the commitments, if they say we're not doing anything whatsoever or there's no mention of it, that's a red. If they have environmental targets, that's an amber. If they're saying we are committing to do this for goal 12.3 or something like that, that's a green. And similar with the actions, most companies are doing really good things. Bulk of sustainability reports out there are nice to read. You know, there's lots of good stories. So if there aren't, there's a red. If there is, there's an amber. And if they specifically talk about how they're supporting a goal, that's a green. And similar with the progress. If they're saying how they are measurably contributing to the goals, that's a green. Saying about generally reporting sustainability-related KPIs and performance figures, that's an amber. So you can quite quickly build up this little chart about how somebody's doing with that journey, and what we expect is that companies are kind of moving from left to right, maybe with the exception of action. So they're starting to make plans, taking a little bit of action, but they're thinking about making commitments, and they're trying to figure out how to go and report progress. What we hope is through the years, what will go and happen, more and more companies will become green. We've given them a nice little stars against that, so the more greens they get, the more stars they get. We're writing out to all these companies, so if you work for a FTSE 350 company, you'll probably before long get a letter to say you've been listed on this site. You'll get a nice little certificate if you got stars, a nice little logo for your website as well. So you can go and search for your company on here. The criteria are nice and clear, and they're in the public domain, but they're not perfect. So if you don't agree with your results or anything like that, let's have a conversation. I want to go and chat about it and work with people to try and understand what they're doing. The aim of this is to go and celebrate the businesses that are supporting the goals. So it's aimed to be a carrot rather than a stick. Maybe a bit of a pointy carrot, but it is a carrot nonetheless. And we're hoping that what businesses will do is they'll understand from this, there's a bit of guidance. By looking at these 4 simple steps, they know what to do to go and help themselves improve. It's a good tool for business leaders as well, because if you're a frustrated sustainability manager, thinking about how do I get my executives to go and care about this and to go and improve, highlighting your competitors on here sometimes can be a really good way of doing it. I've seen that happen once or twice before. And if you work for SSC, you should be extremely proud, by the way. Back to you.
And this is our last one. I'll talk about the postcards first. I think they would have been on the table when you came in, and there's probably still some there. If all we manage to do is get you enthused about the SDGs, that's okay, but really our ambitions are certainly greater than that. So we've got some handy SDG postcards that we would be delighted. If you think there's someone else out there, be it your MP or your child at home or your boss or anybody at all whose address you know or have in your phone, if you want to send them a little note via this postcard and either drop it in the box at the front there with a slot in it or leave it on the table downstairs, we'd be delighted to drop it in the post on your behalf. So we would love to send 30 postcards away from here. So please do take advantage of that. The other thing, of course, is the SDG pins. If you didn't get one, there's still some more downstairs, or come and see myself or Mark. We give these out to everyone that attends SDG Roadshow, and it is very much our hope that you will wear it proudly as one of the 14% of UK citizens that know what the goals are, and you'll take it on the challenge yourself. When I wear it, people say, "What is that?" And I hope they're not sorry they did, but they don't get away without getting a little bit of a preaching to that this is the SDGs. So far I've seen 2 on the tube in London, so we have a long ways to go. I'd like to see one every day on the tube, and I hope we're starting something here where you'll start seeing people walking with them. And it is handy. I've been to events where I don't expect to know anybody, and it's these networking things that are just a little bit awkward and a little more corporate than I am. But I'm wearing my SDG thing, and it's happened a couple of times that people have come up to me and saved me the stress of having to be the assertive networker. And they basically have said, if you're wearing an SDG pin, you can't be all bad. And it's a great icebreaker. So please wear them. If you have, again, someone at home or at the office that might really like one, we could probably see our way clear to even giving you another. Thanks very much to all of our sponsors and supporters today. Fantastic speakers, SEPA, Standard Life Aberdeen, and Colin. I hope you found it to be a worthwhile morning, and I look forward to seeing you all again in the future. So now I think we have until 1:30 before we're rushed out of here. So there's going to be some more coffee downstairs, I think, and we can continue the conversation there. Thank you.